I was eating some sushi the other day and watching Alien when it hit me. What if feudal Japan ever had a Xenomorph incursion? Would samurais be able to deal with the alien menace? To explore this concept further, I decided to make a small diorama. This video is also dedicated to one of my patrons, who requested I build something mixing both Japanese culture and Xenomorph lore. Thanks for all the support, Frank. I started, of course, by looking at some reference images of traditional Japanese architecture. I'll be building an ode to a Shinto shrine as seen in this art by Gregor Badriel. The plan is to have everything fit in a single 1-foot cube, similar to my other cubed encounters, but this time I'll be upping the dimensions to somewhere in the 1/60th scale. To fill up the cube, I'll be designing a building, bridge, torii, as well as a small water feature and accompanying vegetation. I'm going to have the samurai figure standing on the bridge looking out, and the alien creeping up on them from the roof of the building. I decided to throw all the technology I had at this project. If you're curious on the specifics and where I got them from, I'll throw some affiliate links down in the description. Starting with my diode laser, I cut out a ton of profiles out of this medium weight chipboard. This is thin cardstock, typically found at the back of notebooks. Don't you just love the smell of charred paper? Smells like cancer. If you've ever worked with MDF kits, this is somewhat similar. Just need to pop out the parts and they're ready to use. Thought it would also be interesting to compare the results from an FDM printer with these files. They have a slight amount of depth details, which I can print flat on the bed. All the parts in red and black were printed on the longer LK5 printer, which was sent to me recently to test on the channel. This is probably one of the most affordable, huge-sized printers that you can buy these days, and it's received an update from when it was initially launched last year. It seems to have a better hot-end enclosure with an extra blower fan added to aid in cooling both sides of the print. Other than having to disconnect and bypass the filament sensor, since it kept triggering mid-print when there was plenty of filament left. This printer has been a trooper in getting plastic into the shapes that I want it to. I've actually printed a whole other 1-to-1 scale project that I'll show you sometime next month, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss on that. While the technology was busy doing its thing, I thought I would start on the landmasses of the diorama. Taking a 1-foot vinyl tile and sticking a piece of XPS foam to it gives me a bit of elevation to work with. Once stuck on, the tile gives me a great guide to trim the XPS insulation to the exact square I need it to be. Nice. Then set to work on laying out the plan. The building will be at a slight angle, with the bridge being the focal point of the piece. And speaking of the bridge, let's assemble it quickly. Layers of chipboard make for great miniature wood, since it can be weathered and scored with a hobby knife to get some interesting wood grain effect. I used a mixture of tacky PVA glue and super glue in parts to keep this together. The PVA glue will give it most of its strength once dry, while the CA glue helps with the assembly. With the bridge constructed, I was able to trace out its footprint and decide where to dig in my water feature. Using a simple hobby knife, I score and carve away at the material until it's the rough shape I want. I then use a bit of acetone to melt the XPS. I took care to place it in my 3D printing enclosure, which has a fan duct to the outside. Probably not the best thing to breathe in. Now that we have a rough and natural texture, it's time to blend it in more. Using some black gesso, plaster, and cellulose insulation, I glooped it on and spread it everywhere I wanted some interesting texture. For the water feature, I also came in with some coarse sand to give it some varied texture. Alright, while that dries, let's look into assembling the building. I cut out these rectangular parts with some slight engraved lines to give the appearance of tatami mats. They're going to be arranged in a tile pattern across the frame of the building. I'll place a heavy book to let that dry straight from now. Let's take a look at the roof sections next. Placing a piece of black construction paper, I line up some of these rafters to form up the roof slope. I end up using the 3D printed parts for the walls here, since they offer a bit more rigidity over the chipboard ones. It was a bit tricky to get everything to sit square and line up as I glued this together, but eventually I made it work. Getting the first section done was probably the hardest, as I was just able to build up from there. You see, I didn't design specific parts to go into specific locations. I made more of a set of building blocks that I was able to pre-assemble and put into place. That meant I still had to scratch build some of the supports and sections to bridge the gaps across in construction here. I really like how the top section of the roof came together. It really sets the style of the source material. I'm going to be leaving the back side of the building exposed, as if some magic laser cut through the building. This does a really good job in showing off some of the internal architecture of the rafters and trusses inside the roof, which would otherwise be totally hidden. Finalizing the trifecta of technologies used, I also fired up the resin printer for this project, printing both the samurai and the alien Xenomorph to include in the final build. While I was filling up the build plate, I also added a small garden lantern and designed some tree armatures to save me some crafting time as well. I could have made these from twisted wire and patience, but I ran out of patience a while ago, so I'll need to order more. Now that I know the final location of most of the things on the diorama, I took some more time bulking out and varying the elevation of where I'll be putting foliage down. For the river, I broke up some plaster chunks to form a rocky bank. Then I blended the rocks in with some coconut fibers from the pet store and dusted everything with a layer of black tile grout. Soaking everything in a layer of watered-down PVA glue will make for a strong surface. Once dry, it was time to add a bit of color to the water area. This is just a mix of blues, greens, and browns through the airbrush, followed by a dry brushing of sienna and tan highlights. While I had the airbrush out, I gave a coat of brown on the trees and the bridge as well. I also took this time to paint up the little samurai and Xenomorph we'll be using near the end. To give the trees a bit more life, I added some mossy bunches I was sent over from Xetardis, after which I sprayed and glued foam flock to give the top branches more volume. Following a similar approach, I painted on PVA glue and sprinkled various foam flocks, static grass, and coconut fibers on the parts where I would have exposed ground. I had debated on how I was going to tackle the roof shingles on the building. I could have used a simple sheet of corrugated paper and called it good, but I wanted to see if I could use the LK5 to print some full sections of detailed shingles. Several hours later, I had these pop off the plate and ready to use. The advantage of printing them in thin layers like this is that I can now come in and use a heat gun to bend and shape the roof sections to conform to the curvature of the roofline. This is infinitely easier than trying to design them curved in the first place and printing them. After sticking them on with some hot glue, I also added in these ornamental ridges. Taking them for a quick prime outside, I set to painting the bridge, Torii, and the building. The bridge and Torii were actually quite easy since they got an even coat of red with some weathering and brown washes to fill in the details. The building timbers got a few coats of the same red, with the roof being baptized in a dark grayish blue. This would contrast the red and green of the rest of the diorama nicely. To give a bit more dimension to the vegetation on the diorama, I started adding some bushes and other small plants to places they would naturally grow, underneath the bridge, trees, large rocks, and the foundation of the building. The Torii got glued in and blended as well as the bridge at this point. Oh, and I almost forgot to do this, but I need some actual walls for my building. All we had is the frame so far. To make these, I just took some simple white art paper, which is a bit thicker than your regular printer paper. I cut it to size and stuck it in place with some PVA glue. The backside got a secondary layer of frame detailing, completing the look. I want to see if I can shine some lights through this paper later to produce some interesting lighting effects. Time to glue in the building now. It's all starting to come together. Another little minor detail here is these laser cut ferns and reeds, also from Xenomorphs. I want to see how hard these would be to design and cut myself. Project for another day. The trees got glued in place now, blending them in with more bushes and foliage. Using an off-cut piece of plexiglass, I hot glued it to the side where I want a live edge to the water, and got ready to mix my resin. This is a simple 2-to-1 ratio of resin to hardener, which I took the time to mix properly and follow all instructions on. I added in some drops of green, blue, and brown paint to heavily tint the water, and away she goes. A day and a bit later, the resin had cured sufficiently for me to clean up the edges, place in the samurai, as well as the prowling xenomorph on the roof behind him. Something about this is starting to feel familiar. Ah, shoot. I think I accidentally copied a Boylei Hobby Time build. Maybe he won't mind, right? Thank you so much for watching, and thanks again to Longer for sending over this LK5 printer for this project. If you want to pick up any of the equipment I used in the video, I'll have some affiliate links in the description. I'll catch you on the next. Oh, what's this? Looks like I have some new voicemail.
Hey, Knarb, really cool build, man. Looks great. Just want to let you know you're going to be hearing from my lawyers. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day.